The Aggies have a big matchup with the Arkansas Razorbacks this season. Is it a trap game?
You are Locked On Aggies, your daily podcast on the Texas A&M Aggies. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome on into Locked On Aggies. I'm your host, Andrew Stefaniak. Thanks for making Locked On Aggies your first listen every single day. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. So before we get into today's topics and what we're going to break down on today's episode of Locked On Aggies, I want to recap a little bit of what went down yesterday. Yesterday's episode, for those of you everydayers who tuned in, was talking a bit about the SEC's alignment plans and how they're planning to kind of go about adding Texas and Oklahoma to the SEC. So yesterday's episode had to do with that. There was kind of two scenarios that were up in the air. There was the 8 conference game slate where you have one permanent rival, the 9 conference game slate where you have 2 permanent rivals. I was lobbying for the SEC to go with the 9 conference game schedule with 3 permanent rivals, since the Texas A&M game would become a yearly rivalry again. The 8 conference game method would not allow that to happen. So that's why I was saying I'm very pro the 9 conference game schedule. And as soon as I get my episode up and ready for you all, Memorial Day, I was hanging out with the family. News breaks that they had decided they were going to go. Well, they used the word unlikely. They were unlikely to go with the 9 conference game method, and the SEC was kind of leaning toward the 8 conference game schedule, which, as I said yesterday, for those of you that tuned in, I'm not a big fan of that because I think it's going to kill a lot of fun rivalries that make college football so fun, that make it the game each one of us loves. So that's kind of the update. It's looking like it's going to be the 8 conference schedule. Not stoked about it, but that's the information we have now. The SEC kind of big people are meeting right now, and of course, Texas and Oklahoma are present for the first time. So all that's going down. So there should be some clarity to that soon. When we have better clarity, I'll break it down on an episode when we know more. But for today, we're going to be talking a little bit about 3 potential trap games the Aggies could face this season. I kind of wanted to do them in order of the games like that I feel are big-time trap games. So the first trap game that I have is the Arkansas game. It's a neutral site game. Of course, it is in the state of Texas, but not in Kyle Field. It's played at AT&T Stadium, so you're not going to have I still expect Aggie fans to travel in bunches, but it's not going to be your classic Kyle Field environment. So this game, the reason that it feels like a trap game, the line isn't out for this game yet. The line for the 3 trap games we're going to discuss today, only one line is out. We do have the FPI numbers, which I've broken down before, but it gives the Aggies a 61.8% chance to win this game. So that leads me to believe Texas A&M is going to be favored when we get to the season. And for me, a trap game, I think the trap game can mean multiple things, but for me, I think the team that is, playing in the trap game has to be favored. And sometimes I think, we see trap games before a big game. And that's the reason I think Arkansas is a great example of a trap game for the Aggies this season. It's the week before you host Bama, which is one of the pivotal games for this season. The Bama, Tennessee, and LSU games, I've been very clear. I think if the Aggies can sneak away with one of those games, 9 wins is really on the table. So I think it's hard. Of course, teams, everyone will tell you we never overlook an opponent, no matter if it's New Mexico or Abilene Christian. The Aggies or college athletes are going to try their best to not overlook an opponent, but it's hard. You're really thinking about, man, next week we have Bama coming to our place. And Arkansas is no easy opponent. They have a veteran quarterback. They have a great running back. They have a lot of returning players, some good returning defensive players. This is not a team the Aggies are just going to head on into AT&T Stadium and steamroll. So I think this is a real game where the Aggies are going to have to make sure that they are focused on this football game. It's not a big concern for me, but I just feel like I feel like the thing about when you have a big time opponent the next week, it's hard to not overlook who your opponent is. And when it's Arkansas, like I said, a game the Aggies should be favored in Vegas, clearly favored in these FPI statistics here. But it's a game, and it'll be easier to break these games down. You know, this is all preseason talk. It'll be easier to break all this down once we get into the season and kind of see, you know, is KJ Jefferson on this year? Is the offense under Coach Petrino working? It'll be a lot easier to kind of, I mean, there's a good chance we get to this game and it's not a trap game because Arkansas and the Aggies are, you know, teams that are potentially ranked high, and it's a big time college football matchup at a really cool venue. But for right now, it's a game that the Aggies are supposed to go and take care of business. If I had to guess what a line would be in that game, I don't think it's going to be a massive number. I would guess the Aggies are going to be favored by 3 points, a field goal, maybe a point more, a point less. So this is not going to be a game where Texas A&M heads into AT&T Stadium and I think just rolls over Arkansas. They're a talented, older team with an older quarterback, and I think older quarterbacks are such a big deal. Young quarterbacks are scary. I mean, kind of like what the Aggies are dealing with Weigman. If Weigman turns out to be amazing, the Aggies are going to have a great season. If he kind of has a sophomore slump and doesn't have the leap forward we expect this year, the Aggies could struggle. So this game feels pivotal for me. You know, there's 5 games on the schedule, and a handful of these are the trap games we're going to discuss today. But it's pretty much all the games that are your non-conference games besides the Miami game. Miami, Auburn game, the Arkansas game, the South Carolina game, the Mississippi State game. Those 5 games feel like if you can take care of business there, maybe drop one of those 5, pick up one of the 3 games I talked about earlier with the Tennessee, LSU, and Bama games, you're looking at a 8, 9, 10 win season if you can take care of business in the games you're supposed to win. So this Arkansas game, like I said, it's going to be a fun game, and the Aggies need to make sure they are taking this thing one game at a time. I don't expect that to be an issue. It's always in the back of people's head, I think. You know, you're always thinking, okay, we got Bama this week. I got to stay healthy. You know, a player might say, we need to back off a little bit on Arkansas. We got to keep ourselves healthy and keep ourselves ready to go for that Bama game. You can't do that. If you have that mindset, the Razorbacks are going to beat you. So I think that's why this is a game that Texas A&M just get in there, take care of business. I think you have a better roster. Go take care of business at a really cool venue for these young college athletes. So it's a game. The Aggies have to make sure that they are there to take care of business, handle your business, and get home. We're going to talk about 2 more potential trap games on this schedule, but first I want to tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. Make a fast break to FanDuel during the NBA playoffs because right now new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't hit. Of course, the NBA Finals are getting ready to come up here soon. Miami Heat, playoff Jimmy Butler, Denver Nuggets, the Joker. It's going to be a fun series. I'm curious. I'm rooting for. I'm a Jokic fan. I'm going to be honest with you. I like Jokic. A lot of people disagree with me. I like Jokic. I'm kind of rooting for Jokic, but I'm happy either way. If you're rooting one way or the other, if you're a Nuggets fan or maybe you're a Miami Heat fan, go over to FanDuel and take this no-sweat first bet. No risk on your end. If you put money in and the bet doesn't hit, you get that money back in free bets. So go check that out. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Yeah, so trap games. Trap games are a big thing in all sports, whether it's basketball, football, baseball. Trap games are a thing. See it a lot in the NFL. You know, the Chiefs are getting ready to head to play the Bills, but the week before they got to play the Cleveland Browns. I don't know, a team that's kind of not great, not bad. We see teams roll over when you get focused on something else. When you are focused on the following week, teams can get themselves into trouble. And the Aggies need to make sure that does not happen this season because there is no wiggle room on this schedule. While we talked about last week, the Aggies don't have one of the tougher schedules in the SEC. It's still an SEC schedule. You still have to play Bama and LSU and Tennessee and Arkansas and some outstanding football teams. So you can't sleep on anybody on this schedule. The next trap game on this schedule is the Auburn game. Now, it's not as much of a trap game since it is the game following it isn't, like a Bama or a Tennessee, but I just have a weird suspicion about this Auburn football team. They have hit that transfer portal hard. Oh, the line on this game, by the way, is out. It's -8, and the Aggies have a 76.5% chance to win this game according to ESPN's FPI numbers. So this game is, of course, at home in Kyle Field. First conference game of the season. Breaking down the Auburn Tigers a little bit, they're a team that Auburn's a weird school. It seems like whenever you sleep on them, they find a way to win 9 games or something. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but it just feels like, you bring in Hugh Freeze, who has been there, done that in the SEC. Of course, he coached at Ole Miss. I know there was some controversy there, but he was a good coach, coached some good players before all the stuff went down personal life-wise. And, he gets hired. They get rid of their previous coach there and bring on Coach Freeze. And he stacked up in the transfer portal. I was, before I broke down this trap game stuff, I looked at Auburn's, what they had going on over there. They have some outstanding transfer portal additions. They got in some good wide receivers. They brought in a quarterback from Michigan State, Peyton Thorne, who Thorne's a guy who, obviously Kenneth Walker was there, but Thorne led Michigan State to a really good season a couple years ago. And I think, with the right coach, with Hugh Freeze as a guy, of course, considered a quarterback whisperer, I think Auburn could be a good team this year. So they're more of a trap game simply because I think many people right now are kind of chopping up Auburn as a victory, not even really overthinking it. I've seen some predictions for, SEC on Twitter. And of course, these aren't analysts. It's just people on Twitter, but people saying Auburn's going to go 5-7. When you look up and down this roster and what Hugh Freeze has done with the transfer portal, it's hard to think Auburn doesn't at least get 7 wins. And you don't want one of those wins to be at Texas A&M. And the other reason this is kind of a game I could see being a bit of a trap game is the fact that, like I said, it is the first conference game of the season. Your only real test ahead of this game is going to be the game at Miami, which, frankly, I think is going to be a bit better test than Auburn. But, it's SEC football. It's grind and hit people hard in the hole. And, it's SEC football. And this is going to be your first SEC matchup. Luckily, it's at home in front of your crowd. Jordan Hare over there in Auburn is not a place you want to play. So having this game at home, you feel good about that. Like it feels weird, first conference game for Hugh Freeze and all that. You know what I mean? It's one of those games where it's like Texas A&M's roster is a million times better, but you just think it's like Auburn's just a weird school. So I think the Aggies take care of business there, but that's a game, if that transfer class, like Auburn's a team, if those transfers kind of work it all together and figure it out, I think Auburn could be a good team. If they don't, I think Auburn could be a really bad team. So that'll be another thing we'll just kind of have to see after the first few weeks of the season. So Auburn, a team I think could be a trap game for the Aggies, but I think if they just take care of business, it shouldn't be a problem. They have the better roster than the Auburn Tigers. So the Aggies should take care of business here, but it's a game. Don't overlook it. Don't look past it. The final trap game on this list I have here is the South Carolina game. So the South Carolina game for me, I've talked a lot about how I think South Carolina is an up-and-coming program. And I think that, they've just done a good job on the recruiting trail. They have they have a top 20 class coming in. They didn't hammer the portal by any means. They brought in 24 total recruits in this recruiting class and 10 transfers. So I think they just kind of filled some needs. They're trying to recruit best possible, and they brought in some good recruits. I don't know how much of an impact those recruits are going to have this season, but kind of like Arkansas, South Carolina does have a proven quarterback in Spencer Rattler, who is a guy who has pretty high, high odds to win the Heisman. I don't see that happening, but you know what I mean. I mean, the writing on the walls there is that we're there in Columbia is that South Carolina is going to have a pretty good football team. This game, of course, once again, is in Kyle Field, but you look at the Aggies game the following week, which is why this feels like a bit of a trap game. It is at Ole Miss. In that game at Ole Miss, I know I've talked about this a time or two, but I think that's the biggest game of the season because that's one of those games in that like 5 or 6 game list that if you're able to take care of business in that game, 9 wins becomes possible for this team. And I know a lot of people have been down. A lot of people in the comments are down on the Aggies this season, which I get it. Last year was rough. I get it. But this roster, if it all happens, this team can win 9 games. I don't think there's a debate to that. I don't think that's even sunshine pumping. I think that's just reality. So you have to take care of business. And I think this South Carolina game, with, like I said, Rattler, I'm not the biggest Rattler fan. I've talked about that before. But he is a proven guy who has played in the SEC for a year now. He was a guy who was if I remember correctly, he was one of the top couple of preseason Heisman voters back when he was or one of the, best odds to win the Heisman when he was at Oklahoma one year. So, it's a game where if you overlook South Carolina and say, man, this Ole Miss game is one of the biggest on the schedule, we got to go beat the Rebels in Oxford. You could drop a game to South Carolina. You can't let that happen. You can't overlook the Gamecocks. You have to, they come into your home. They come into your place. You got to take care of business. You got to beat them. You have the better roster. And I think this is a game where if the Aggies come in, they play well, they prepare well, and the season's gone well to this point, I don't see this game being an issue. But if it has been a great season so far for the Aggies and they begin to kind of look past this game and start looking at that Ole Miss game, that is when you can get yourself into trouble. The Aggies cannot do that. They have to stay linear focused. They have to make sure they are focused on a week-to-week basis, and that applies to all of these trap games I have discussed. So those are the trap games on this schedule. And like I say, hopefully the Aggies are it isn't even the problem, and the Aggies are able to take care of business against Arkansas, Auburn, and South Carolina. But we'll just have to see. Hey, the season is under 100 days away, so we will know. We will find out the outcome of these games before you even know it. The rest of the Aggies 2023 roster is officially on campus. That is correct. It was move-in day this past weekend, and the rest of the Aggies are officially on campus to get rocking and rolling for the 2023 football season. I'm going to kind of go through the names of who's here and talk about, what's going on with all these guys and how we feel. Number one guy on this list that of new arrivals is David Hicks Jr., the talented top 10 player in the class, 5-star defensive tackle. Mountain of a man. It'll be interesting to see if he's able to get on the field. It's hard to see a world where a top 10 player in the class, you talk about SEC ready. I don't see a world where he's not SEC ready. The frame is there. Everything's there that you need in a player like a Hicks Jr. with him coming in to be a true freshman. All the attributes are there. The size is there. So I think he could come in and play a role for the Aggies this season. I'd be curious to see how much. I could see him having a year similar to Walter Nolan last year, hopefully a little bit better than Nolan's numbers. That'd be awesome. But like I said, the Aggies are deep on the defensive line. I think that's one of the best position groups in, besides maybe like wide receiver. I think that's one of the best position groups on the team. So it'll be interesting to see his role, but it's good to get an outstanding player on campus. Next guy is Rylan Kennedy, a linebacker, 3-star player. What I like about him, he's 6'4". He's a big player, big-bodied linebacker. We know linebacker has been a big talking point for the Aggies. The play there wasn't great last season. It was, and the issue there was recruiting. The Aggies really, if you look at the recruiting numbers on linebacker, especially for like this year and next year, not a lot of highly touted recruits. So hopefully Kennedy's a guy with his big frame that's able to come in and kind of be a guy who becomes a great player for the Aggies. And with a frame like that, it's possible. Next guy is Dalton Brooks. He's a 4-star athlete. He's going to be a safety. the number 96 player in the class, 6'2", big, long, lanky player. He's a guy, once again, I think he could come in and compete for some snaps on the defense when he gets to campus. I love that he's played both sides of the ball. I've talked about that. I think it helps you whether you're your main position is cornerback or safety and you're playing wide receiver, or your main position is wide receiver and you're playing cornerback or safety in high school. I think it's good. I think it helps you develop a knowledge of the game that some people just don't have. So I think that's a good thing for Brooks. And like I said, he is a highly touted guy who's going to be a great addition for this team and could potentially get some snaps with some injuries or some bad play. Could be a guy that cracks the rotation at some point. Bravion Rogers, a cornerback here, a 4-star number 97 player in the class. So that's kind of funny. And I always use 24/7 Sports. I say that some, but I want to reiterate that. So it's funny that they're back to back in 24/7 Sports rankings. But a cornerback, 4-star guy. Once again, I think cornerback's another room that the Aggies are pretty deep in. They did a good job hitting that transfer portal for cornerback. But he's a guy that could he get a couple snaps this season? Maybe. They're like I said, the Aggies are deep at that position. I don't see Rogers coming in and having a big role, but you never know. Chance Johnson, another linebacker, 3-star guy. A lot of people look at stars and see it as kind of the end-all be-all for players. I think the thing about stars you have to remember is it's a high school rating. I mean, how many times, they always the first round of the NFL draft will happen, and they'll put up a list of like what all the picks were out of high school. We've seen 2 stars and 3 stars and no stars get drafted in the top 10, first round, whatever. And so a 3-star player, it's still a guy who can come in and develop into a stud if the coaching staff handles things correctly. And a guy like Johnson could be possible. And I love bringing in linebackers because, like I said, it's a position that the Aggies need to shore up. So you bring this guy in, see what happens. Naquil Bertrard is this frame on him. Bertrard, 6'7", 315-pound, 3-star offensive tackle. I just love big, tall. I love that frame on a tackle, 6'7", 315, because that's the frame where like you could put on 15 pounds and be fine. I think you could stay at 315 if you wanted. It's a frame where I like it. You can sculpt it like you're an artist. I mean, you can do what you want with a 6'7", 315 frame. If you're the strength coach, if you are the coaching staff, you can have him put on a couple pounds. Don't think he comes in and cracks the rotation this season, but I do think he could develop with that frame into a monster. And offensive line is one of those positions where I discredit rankings a little bit because it's just so. If you're big, you can develop into a great offensive lineman. And I think we could see that with Bertrard once he's in a college weight room for a little while. Marcus Reed, the 4-star quarterback, Marcel Reed. I don't know why I said Marcus, but Marcel Reed, going to be a great player, not going to be in the discussion this year, of course, with Wegman, with Max Johnson. Reed's not going to be a guy who is even, talked about in the quarterback battle, but he is a great depth piece for this team. If something happens, a 4-star player and a guy, he fits into Coach Petrino's system well and could develop into a starter before you even know it. So, hopefully by the time Wegman moves on, whether it's to the pros or to, whatever he's got going on in life, hopefully Reed's the guy who's ready to rock and roll and take on that starting role in 1, 2, 3 years, whatever it ends up being. Tyler White, the punter for the Aggies, he's going to come in and be a guy who, the Aggies have a great punter, which is a great thing. But White is a guy who can come in and he can punt for the Aggies, hopefully next year, following year, whenever it ends up being. Cool thing about him, he's also going to pitch for the Aggies baseball team. So there you go. You bring in a punter and a pitcher. There you go. Now this name, it's a handful. Samu Tanu Pepe, 3-star defensive tackle, but you love this frame. This is just a on the center, just nose, big defensive tackle. This is a frame. Listen to this frame. 6'4", 390 pounds. That is you just clog up space. You just stand there and you say you are not going to run. I'm not letting the running back get past me. And so he's going to be the type of guy, he might not ever put up that many statistics or tackles when during his time in a Texas A&M uniform, but that's not his job. His job is to clog up space. And with a frame like that, goodness, I promise you, he can clog up space. So he's a player that, even though it's a 3-star, I'm excited to see what he can kind of develop into. I'm forgetting the name of the big guy for the Buccaneers who I can't remember his name, but I'm sure NFL fans know who I'm talking about. But he, if you know who I'm talking about, I'm not going to look it up. If you know who I'm talking about, I remember. So never mind. Vita Vea. He reminds me of Vita Vea, just frame and the clog up space kind of guy. So I'll be interested to see what he can develop into during his time in College Station. Then is our transfer portal additions. I'm not going to go in deep on these guys because we've talked about them. But Josh Dewberry, Finn Durstein, Drontine Davis, Jerry Johnson, Jalen Henderson, the quarterback from Fresno State, and David Bailey. Those guys are on campus too. So it is great to have our Texas A&M Aggies transfer portal additions and high school recruits officially on campus, ready to get to work and get to it for the 2023 season. And hopefully some of these names we just listed can be guys that play a big role for the Aggies at some point in their Texas A&M career, whether it's sooner or later. Regardless, we're excited to have them. Can't wait to see what these guys all develop into. But that is going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Aggies. I appreciate you all stopping on in, and we'll see you tomorrow.